Well, good morning, and thank you for tuning in or showing up for our January Director's Cut. We're going to give you an oil and gas update looking at the month of November of 2023. So we'll kind of walk through the numbers here, and then we did get some questions submitted prior to the Director's Cut this morning, and then we've got someone in the room, so we'll take questions online and from the room as well. Just pointing out, October had been a good month with exceeding the revenue forecast for production by 14%. November exceeded it by 16%. So we're very, very close to that 1.3 million barrels a day that we were looking for by the end of the year. Still hopeful that December could get us there, but we were 12,000 barrels a day short. So 1.278 and some loose change. I guess 11,500 barrels a day short, which is just 2 or 3 Bakken wells. So we're still hopeful that December will put us at that 1.3 mark, but we're essentially there. Saw a 2% increase in oil production, and our number 2 state, New Mexico, that we always track, and the reason we track New Mexico was that North Dakota was number 2 in the nation for a long time, and then with the onset of the Permian activity, New Mexico passed us about 4 years ago and is in second place, not a huge amount above North Dakota, about 500,000 barrels a day. So we track that just to keep track. Not encouraging news on the crude oil prices. Today's price looks like North Dakota market price is about $67 a barrel, and that's about 4% below revenue forecast. We set the revenue forecast at $70 a barrel. That's always the wild card where we try to guess, and world crude oil markets are very, very unpredictable and very unstable at this point in time. So we saw a significant drop yesterday as crude market analysts, took a look at what was going on in the Middle East and decided that the threat was not as great as it had looked a week or two ago, and so we saw crude oil drop yesterday. In November, of course, we beat the revenue forecast by 4%, so both production and price were above. November natural gas production up 1.5%. So again, we're seeing that flat gas oil ratio as we see activity outside the core more than inside the core. We did set an all-time high natural gas capture of just under 3.3 billion cubic feet a day. So good news on the natural gas capture front. Went from 94 to 95% statewide, held at 95% for the Bakken, and we saw the trust area of Fort Berthold hit 97%. So very good gas capture numbers. When we look at rig count, happy to see that 39 today. We're inching into that 40 number, and discussions with industry indicate that we're going to get there next year, but I'll know more in first week of February. I'm going down to Houston. Many of our operators are there. I hope later that month or the following month to get into the Dallas area and talk to the other operators. But it looks like budgets are strong. They're either as good as 2023 or up from 2023. So we think we're going to see increased drilling and completion activity. New all-time high in well numbers. Good work on the inactive well count, down about 60. And as we had talked before, our duck wells, essentially there is no duck well inventory anymore. We're just in the mill of the race between drilling rigs and frac crews. 17 frac crews currently active in the state. I think that's going to ramp down as this cold weather hangs on and as it sets in. You saw what's been happening in the oil patch with problems with produced water, let alone with frac water. So as this cold weather settles in, there's a real hesitancy to heat that water. Increase in activity on Fort Berthold Reservation, that's encouraging to see. So we saw production pop back up, and 5 rigs currently operating there, all of them on fee lands. The two active seismic shoots that we have going are both carbon storage. And that's been the trend in seismic activity all year long. I already talked about gas capture. On the federal regulatory front, it's a constant battle to keep up with. Encouraging news 2 days ago, though, the Security and Exchange Commission withdrew their proposal for natural asset companies. So that proposal has now been withdrawn. There was a lot of pushback from Congress as well as from the states. That was a proposal where it was going to be possible for foreign money to set up a corporation in the United States that was allowed to lose money and to just purchase natural assets or things like mineral rights, and then basically not produce them or develop them. And so that was withdrawn. So with that, that's the numbers, very positive numbers. I do want to talk about what January is going to look like. It started, and Justin kind of tracks this for us. He has access to some numbers that let us look at production, not quite in real time, but pretty much as the days develop. So the cold weather hit a week ago. January 11th was the first indication that this Arctic blast was going to have an effect on the oil patch. By January 12th, it looked like we were down almost 300,000 barrels a day. The worst of it was the 17th, 2 days ago, when it looked like we were down about 700,000 barrels a day. So if you think 1.3 minus 700, that's way below 1 million barrels a day. It looks like as of yesterday, we were still down 500,000, and as of today, about 400,000. So we are coming back out of it, but we are probably still well below 1 million barrels a day production in North Dakota. So why does that happen? Well, the first thing that happens is the natural gas gathering systems fill up with liquids. Our Bakken gas is very, very liquid rich. And so the gas gathering systems fill with liquids. Basically, the compressor systems and the pipelines drown. And so wells get shut in order to avoid flaring. And so the oil production falls off in conjunction with the drop in natural gas gathering and processing capacity. Once the wells get shut in or curtailed, then it becomes really, really difficult to bring them back on production, especially at minus 30 or minus 70 wind chills. People can't go out and work on the wells, and so it's very hard to put them back on. It'll be a long, slow recovery. A lot of times these things take a month, from the time that it hits until we see back to normal production. So like I said, December should be good, but January is going to be a very, very bad month in terms of production numbers. We still think it'll be good in terms of gas capture, but all of the overall numbers are going to be down. Answer a few questions that came in prior to the director's cut. So the first one was to talk a little bit about the BLM oil and gas lease sales. There was a sale in December. Only 12 parcels were listed. Pretty good results, $7.7 million. But that almost all of that was raised by 2 parcels that are in the core Tier 1 geology area. The rest was pretty much Tier 3 geology, and so those parcels brought $50, $60 an acre, whereas the 2 Tier 1 geology parcels brought $20,000 to $21,000 an acre. So the bulk of that sale was those 2 parcels. So there were 2 Tier 1 parcels in there and a whole bunch of Tier 3. The upcoming sale in March is extremely disappointing. 6 parcels, a little over 2,000 acres. There's almost 800 parcels out there that have been nominated since 2013, and only 6 of them made it through to a sale in March. The reason we haven't really gotten into been able to drill down into the actual reasons behind the parcels being off. in the sale documents, it just lists that they were taken off of the lease sale based on state director discretion. So there is a court hearing here in Bismarck coming up February 9th, and we're going to be asking a lot of questions about what the real reason behind the state director taking those off the sale are. In addition to that, most of those 6 parcels are Tier 3. They're way out in Slope County or parts of North Dakota that have little to no activity. So I don't think there are any Tier 1 parcels in that 6. There may be 1 or 2 Tier 2 parcels, but very, very disappointing. Like I said, 9th of February, we'll be asking a lot of questions of the state director in Judge Trainer's courtroom about what's going on with those lease sales. Another question that came in was, and I talked about it, why do we list New Mexico? Well, you know, they passed us up about 3 years ago and became our #2 US producer. And so we keep track of them, trying to see, has their production stabilized while ours is growing again, or is their production, you know, going into decline? It's been pretty stable at a little over 1.75 million barrels a day. So again, New Mexico has kind of hit that plateau like North Dakota did some 5 years ago or so. They've actually seen the rig count drop from 105 to 97. So again, the softer oil prices and a lot of maturity now developing in their part of the Permian Basin. So we track it because of that. The last one that came in that I want to talk about was the new announcement from the EPA about a methane fee, methane emission fees. So what is the potential impact of these methane fees in North Dakota? North Dakota has 2,585 wells that have no gas sales access. And so those wells are going to be put at great risk by this methane fee because they are required, because of that, for safety reasons, they're required to flare whatever natural gas they produce. So we took a look at that. Those 2,585 wells are stripper wells, meaning they produce very small amounts of oil, and economically, North Dakota gives them an oil extraction tax break just to keep them on production because they provide jobs. So because the economics on those wells are so slim, and because they don't have access to gas sales, there's a very good chance that that $900 per ton fee will put them out of business. So potentially 2,585 wells on the block. What does that mean in terms of our economy? Well, you know, they are stripper wells, so they produce in the neighborhood of 25,000 barrels a day. We would lose the gross production tax on that, but probably the big impact is that they provide about 2,600 jobs. And so there's not just the production and the gross production tax at risk, but the royalty revenue from those wells, which is almost 3 times the gross production tax, and 2,600 jobs out of 50,000, you know, direct oil and gas jobs in the state. So that's a significant potential impact. You know, you're looking at 5% of North Dakota's oil and gas jobs being put at risk by that methane fee. I can tell you that North Dakota is going to push back really hard on that. And it's, we believe, designed to put marginal wells out of business. And what that means is a loss of royalty income, a loss of gross production tax for the state, and a loss of a significant number of jobs in counties, you know, like Bottineau, Renville, Burke, where those stripper wells are located. So we'll be following that as we have a chance to look more and more into the impact of that, but significant impacts for North Dakota. I have another one, and this one's for Justin. talking about Trans Mountain
Okay.
Express.
We have one online here.
Okay.
It says, we've seen a large number of spills and leaks due to the cold this week. How much has that impacted oil production?
Great. So the question was, how much has the spills and leaks impacted oil production? Fairly small impact. There's been 60. And so, yeah, those 60 facilities are shut in. Our best guess is, maybe 5,000 barrels of oil a day. But the big impact, of course, is the liquid loading of the gas gathering systems and the wells being shut down in order to avoid flaring. And we're still looking at about 500,000 barrels a day that we think is shut in or curtailed because of that. Now, as we warm up, that cluster of spills will probably double, because it's this extreme cold weather puts unbelievable stress on the valves and fittings that handle our produced water. And so as they freeze and get cold, flanges break, and some of the plastic materials break. As they warm up, the same thing happens. They expand and things break. So we're expecting this next week, when we go into warmer weather, that we're going to have problems again. Hopefully our oil and gas operators are going to be proactive and get out there and try to head some of that off. Let's hope.
And then on a related note, with recent weather, how has that affected the potential drop in frac activity and affected the outlook for production near term and long term? And then what is the target expectation for output by the end of 2024?
Okay. So speaking to the frac activity, like I said, we still have 17 frac crews working today. That's because they started on zipper fracs or multi-well frac jobs prior to the cold snap hitting, but when we were having good weather. Typically, this kind of weather cuts that by 2/3. I would expect that we're going to see frac crew numbers drop into the 5 range within a week or two, as they finish up the frac jobs that they started. So we're going to see a big drop in completions January, February, pick up again probably in March, April, but by then we get into road restrictions, and that can inhibit it some too. It's going to take a significant amount of time, a month or more, to recover from the 700,000 barrel a day drop that we saw due to the weather. That's going to impact production, January and February. We still think that we're going to finish this year at about 1.3 million barrels a day, and we should be approaching 1.35 to 1.4 by the end of next year, with 40 rigs running. That's going to help immensely, but that's only enough to slowly grow production. I mean, we can't grow production by 5 or 10% with those kind of rig numbers. So hoping for 1.4 by the end of 2024. Joey?
First question I have is, with like all these spills, what are your regulators sort of out there seeing? Are they seeing a lot of things that could have been prevented, or because it is more than in the past, I've been told. So like, is there stuff that could have been prevented, or is it mostly just inevitable due to how bad it got out there? Sure.
So the question was the cluster of spills that we saw, which was approaching about 10 a day. What did the regulators, the inspectors, see out there in the field? Almost all of them, maybe a few, maybe 10% could have been prevented, but almost all of them were a result of water freezing, above ground fittings and connections and valves that were exposed to that -70 wind chill and -30 temperature. And so plastic materials and elastomer materials gave up and broke. So very few preventable ones. I am happy to report that I think out of the 60, less than 5 of them got off site. And a few years ago, we caught a lot of heat for putting diking and berm rules in place, but those have really paid off. And this is the time when they do pay off. Next week, it'll be warming up, and our inspectors will be out there making sure those spills get cleaned up. It's still a little bit too cold to have people out and exposed to the temperature too much. But I would say less than 10% of them would have been preventable things. It was just materials failing due to the cold temperatures, and very encouraged by the fact that our diking and berming rules kept those spills on the location, and they didn't get off and contaminate surface water or farm fields or those sort of things. A lot of that happened, you know, with the way wells were constructed in the 90s and before, but the new rules are really making a difference.
And then I guess the other question is DMR watching the Chevron case? How could that sort of impact its operations? Could it impact the BLM leasing thing? Curious about that.
Yeah, great. So the question was, are we watching the Chevron thing? We've had some conversations with Chevron. They're not talking a lot because they're still in SEC and let's see, the Federal Bank Commission, FTC maybe, Federal Trade Commission, Securities and Exchange Commission are auditing that merger, and so they don't want to get out ahead of those regulators and start speculating. I'm trying to get an audience with the Chevron management when I'm in Houston, and hopeful that that will happen. We have extended an invitation for them to come to the Wilson Basin Conference. We're pretty confident that they'll be through the FTC SEC business by then, and that somebody from Chevron will be here to talk to North Dakota about what their plans are for North Dakota. The encouraging thing about Chevron is they are a big enhanced oil recovery company, and they have reassured us that they did not buy Hess to spin the Bakken off. They didn't buy it just for its Gulf of Mexico assets. They bought it for unconventional and Gulf of Mexico. They have a big stake in the Permian, and so they hope to use some, you know, technology transfer back and forth, things they learn here from what Hess is doing, and things that are going on in the Permian. Interesting that yesterday we saw our first Industrial Commission case for 4-mile laterals, and that's a Hess case. So they're continuing to push the envelope in terms of increasing the technology. Interestingly enough, they're going to drill a monitoring well in the tail end or at the tail end of those 2 4-mile laterals, so that they can see if the fracturing techniques are actually working 4 miles away, and what kind of drainage they're getting. So they continue to push the technology envelope, and we're very hopeful. It was encouraging to hear that Chevron did not buy Hess with the plan of flipping the Bakken to someone else, but they really want to be a Bakken player.
And then I was actually I appreciate that. I was asking about the Chevron deference case at the Supreme Court. I was curious if that impacts anything the DMR does.
I don't think so. It's sort of secondary to what we do. Yeah, appreciate that. Totally misunderstood the question.
But I mean, I do appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
The update.
Okay.
Yeah. That's it.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, I've got it here too. So
We have one printed too.
yeah, I have one thing too, so I left 2 of them there for you.
Yeah, you ready?
Perfect. Well, good morning, everyone. Justin Kringstad, Director of the North Dakota Pipeline Authority. I suspect a lot of the questions and things folks will want to talk about at the end has to do with the recent weather events. So we'll cruise through some of the November information. There wasn't a whole lot dramatic that was taking place. I'll have you just follow. Yep, perfect. You heard from Lynn. Slide 3 of this deck, just a reminder of what happened at the end of October that still was impacting some of the November production capabilities that we were seeing. I'm real optimistic about what's going to be coming out in the December timeframe prior to the January month. I'm I'm hopeful that December will be one of the highest months for oil and gas in North Dakota. It was a pretty calm month weather-wise. When we look at slide 4 on the just month-to-month changes, again, nothing dramatic, real steady on those GORs as we continue to expect. I still have in my forecasting models another 6 to 12 plus months of these steady gas oil ratios before we start anticipating things to keep climbing up. No significant changes on the way our oil was moving out of the basin. The pricing dynamics and a lot of that was fairly consistent at October to November and even through December timeframes. So you'll notice that on some of those longer term trend charts. Pricing, pad 1, pad 5, pad 5 now being the highest price market. Again, that is where a large percentage of our crude by rail goes. Specifically to the Northwest Washington refineries that have a very strong appetite for those Bakken barrels. So we're still seeing and estimating right around a couple trains per day or a little less leaving North Dakota, primarily headed to, as you can see on slide 9, that pad 5 West Coast area, over 90% estimated for that October, or the latest numbers we have available to us. We look at pricing as of today. Again, mid-70s for that Cushing area. Not a large spread, sub $5 in that Brent WTI. The one thing that has continued here the last couple months now is that Clearbrook pricing being in the negative territory again. For many years, that was the case. That Clearbrook was typically always at a discount to WTI. There was a window, 2022, 2023. We had a lot of strong pricing. Up until some dynamics were taking place with Canadian crude, the Trans Mountain concerns and delays potentially on that. I've already got a question here. I might as well answer it now. So one of the questions that came in had to do with what potential price impact and potential production impact with Trans Mountain coming into service here later this year. I would say that the first thing on that topic is that when there was industry concern and that there was going to be unforeseen delays in that system going into service. And a reminder for those of you, it's a Canadian pipeline that moves and is planning to expand capacity to the west coast of Canada for export. Why that matters, the primary route for Alberta crude oil into the U.S. is on the Enbridge mainline system, which transports crude in large quantity through Clearbrook. And so Clearbrook is that interface between Canadian, high volume Canadian flows and North Dakota flows into that Clearbrook marketplace. With the Trans Mountain concerns, we saw Canadian oil prices start to spread out and get more severe discounts. The same then translated into the Clearbrook Bakken. If your competitors' prices are getting hit, that also impacts North Dakota. When we look at the futures curves, so to directly answer the question, what impact of it coming online, we see the futures curves back into that positive territory by next summer. So I think the futures are, back in that $2 premium at Clearbrook by that summer time frame. So I anticipate when that system comes online here, end of Q1, beginning of Q2 of 2024, that's going to have positive pricing impacts on the Bakken. And from a production standpoint, I don't know that that's going to sway the broader regional production profile, but it will certainly be an uplift to prices is what I'm anticipating there. So switching gears now back to the slide deck, slide 11. Again, just some minor changes, imports, exports. You heard from Lynn on slide 12, consistent gas capture from a percentage wise, record levels of actual volumes, which is very positive. So again, the focus for reducing this flaring volume is going to continue to be strongly on that orange slice, which is how do you increase compression, keep pigs moving, and continue to keep those lines as optimized as possible. And we've seen that trend now for a number of months, really bottoming out for now at that 5% level. I think that obviously the industry has targets to get even more aggressive than that, which is encouraging, and the planning taking place to make that happen. Last month, I noted some concerns where we saw more wells producing gas then new wells getting connected to the gathering system. I was hopeful a month ago that that would correct itself, and it did. So in November, we saw that catch back up and close that gap again. Some weaker price outlooks from the EIA. This is their January price outlook. They did shift lower their forecast for 2024, now extending it out into that 2025 timeframe. Again, at the end of this, you can see it at kind of that mid to upper 70s level at the end of their forecast period. We'll skip slide 16, nothing new to talk about there. On the gas side, this is where things will start to get interesting here as we transition. So a reminder, and we'll pull back to this slide on 18, kind of the overall dynamics and how North Dakota's natural gas infrastructure works. And so what you're seeing on this map, this is the one you typically see and think of when you think of North Dakota's natural gas pipelines. Also on here, the little black icons are our gas processing plants. And then what you don't see on this map are thousands of miles of natural gas gathering systems that spiderweb out from those processing plants to those individual wells. And so it's a coordinated effort all the way from the production facility through those gathering systems to the processing plant. The processing has to take place, and then from there, the tailgate side of those plants has to have a home. And so for the residue or the dry gas, that's what we're looking at here on this graphic. The other piece that you don't see on here is our natural gas liquids transmission systems, which also takes product away from those gas processing facilities that you see on this map. So I'll just quickly give you an update of where things are at. We saw prior to the January timeframe that market share of moving North Dakota gas on our major export system creeping and approaching that 90% level. You can see the delta dip there as Bakken production was hit over the last week. And then also one thing that we'll continue to watch going forward, because it has started to come up again in some FERC filings, is the BTU level. So TC Energy at the end of December filed a rate case and did not put a specific limit in that proposed tariff, but they did note that this is an operational challenge for them anytime that BTU number starts up going above that 1100 level. So nothing formal in that, but it was being identified as an operational risk for their system. And so that is why we continue to watch this closely. So I'm going to back up then to slide 18 and just talk about the recent January events. And so leading up to this, the pipeline companies themselves, the first notices were starting to go out January 9th, so 10 days ago, kind of basically prepping the industry to know to start preparing for a cold weather event and what type of challenges that has posed in the past. And one of the biggest things, when you think about that system I outlined a moment ago, think about it from a gas and flow dynamics and scheduling standpoint. So you've got producers who have to understand their own production, not only from an individual well, but a field-wide basis. They're communicating with those gas processing plants to let that processing plant know how much product they should expect from those facilities. The gas processing plant then needs to coordinate that with the pipeline systems that you see here. And when production starts to get impacted, that trickles then from the well to the gas processing facility. If that gas processing facility is short on volumes, then you start getting into restricted environments where the pipeline system, they know that downstream, that mid-con and the Chicago markets, they're in desperate need for 100% of as much of the gas that they can get. And so if the Bakken is no longer able to produce, you'll see restrictions get put into place along these interstate pipeline systems. And the key thing that we'll talk about here is that northern borderline. As the Bakken production started to drop, what we saw backfilling to keep that system as whole as possible was Canadian volumes ramping up substantially. And so we typically see anywhere from 300 to 500 million cubic feet of Canadian gas coming through North Dakota. During the last week, that had ramped up, well above 1.2, 1.3 billion cubic feet of gas. So it was largely Canadian gas that was keeping northern border full as it was exiting North Dakota. Even in our homes here in the Bismarck-Mandan communities, a large portion of the gas being burned still today is Canadian gas, as that Bakken gas needs time to recover and come back into service. So Again, during these events, operational flow orders, force majeure, and there's just a constant, around the 24 hours a day, different scheduling calls being made of how, at the end of the day, the primary concern is making sure those pipes stay full so that they can get to communities, get to citizens to keep them, safe and warm during these events. So I get obviously kind of a backstage view of a lot of this stuff as it plays out. So I want to thank all the men and women that 24 hours a day over the last 10 days have just been grinding to make sure that everyone has the gas they need. We didn't have any curtailments in North Dakota. We didn't have any service outages or calls to reduce consumption, which is phenomenal. That means they were able to schedule and make sure that everyone was kept whole. So again, hats off to everyone that made that possible. So with that, I'd be glad to answer any other questions.
What I have online here, you just answered.
Okay.
How the natural gas production has been affected by the cold.
Yep. Okay, so this question is coming in from online, having to do with natural gas expansion projects and what type of shortages we see coming. We see, in order for the Bakken natural gas infrastructure to keep pace, we are going to need expansions all the way from the wellhead to the processing to the residue to the natural gas liquids. And so there are a number of discussions taking place right now. Obviously, you have Bison reversal at FERC as we speak. That system is going to add at least 300 million cubic feet of gas capacity. There are other projects in the works for that. Natural gas liquids is another concern that was mentioned in the question. And certainly there are folks looking at expansions on existing One Oak systems as well as potential projects above and beyond that by different parties. So it is something that today's infrastructure will not be adequate to meet future gas production expectations. So we will need continued expansion across the board at every aspect of our gas infrastructure. There was a good report that came out yesterday, RBN Energy, Rusty Brazel and his team there did a phenomenal job kind of outlining some of those challenges. So that, that was their take on it. I would say it's directionally consistent with what I see. So there is definitely a lot of eyes on this issue right now, and then we're going to continue to work to make sure that gas doesn't become a major hindrance to development plans here in the basin. Okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Have a good weekend.